Okay. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhuktale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachaline Nivasesha Sunyavadi Vashtatara Satanine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So I've opened the volume up and it's come at text 181. We definitely read this one because I can remember this description of Krishna's feet compared to lumps of sugar.
Yeah.
Compared to sugar lumps. Does anyone have a specific verse that we left off? I think it can't be far from here.
I thought it'd be, because I didn't join you last Thursday, so you must have read quite a few after that.
Sahachar is not here. She normally keeps good track of this. Again, the discussion was quite a lot about the Brahman conception compared to actual Krishna consciousness.
And then we came to a point that happiness is only achieved in devotional service, right?
Yeah, that's the ultimate conclusion. The level of happiness achieved through bhakti doesn't compare in the slightest to the so-called happiness obtained from liberation, so-called liberation into Brahman. Anybody else out there can help us with where we left off? I should have put a bookmark. Actually, let me just look. Sorry, I'm wasting precious time here. I'm just going to look online and it's going to tell us because we've got our YouTube thing and it's got the channel where it says where we left off. So I'm just going in there now. Oh, here it is, 187. So we're on 188.
I thought it would be.
So go back.
Okay.
Okay, 188. That's Hare Krishna. Okay, let's.
A few, and then. Oh, okay, Labanga, you can read.
Yeah, okay, Maulabanga, please read Hare Krishna. Can you hear us?
188.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, 188. Great. When a jiva is liberated by knowledge of his true self, Maya ceases to act on him, and his wandering comes to an end. He then perceives himself to be full of bliss as a small portion of the Supreme. Commentary. The jiva is liberated when he attains knowledge of his own real identity as pure spirit. The spiritual self-knowledge one gains in the preliminary stage gives only partial spiritual happiness. But that stage of liberation can then lead to the full self-realization of Krishna consciousness, in which one finds full ecstasy. Devotees of the personality of Godhead are superior to persons who are merely liberated, for though the devotees and the merely liberated share the same spiritual identity as jivas, the devotees enjoy the special happiness of bhakti in their worship of the Lord and their realization of his lotus feet.
Any
go on.
question? Yeah,
Next
why
one.
not? Let's get.
In all spheres of activity, the results one achieves matches the discipline one has practiced. Thus, in the liberation attained by knowledge of one's own self, the result is meager. Commentary. To clarify their point, the Bhakti Shastris here introduce the general principle that results come according to the means one employs. This rule applies to both ordinary and transcendental life. Scissors cannot do the job of an axe, nor can methods aimed merely at realizing the Jiva soul yield the same result as methods for realizing the Supreme Soul. The sadhana of acquiring knowledge of the Jiva soul, who is but a small part of Brahman, gives but a partial insignificant result in liberation, because the sadhana itself is only partial. Text 190. Suffering the torments of material existence and lacking the taste for loving exchanges in true spiritual life, seekers of liberation profusely glorify liberation, just as persons aspiring for heaven praise heaven. Commentary. Why do some transcendentalists describe the happiness of liberation as supreme? Because they are frustrated with material life and they misunderstand real spiritual life. Their minds are disturbed by the pains of birth, death, and the other torments of this world, and so they cannot taste rasa, that special heart-melting spiritual nectar of love that pure devotees have for the Supreme Lord. In that deprived condition, such frustrated non-devotees develop the desire to attain liberation. They glorify liberation in many ways, but their words do nothing to make liberation more than it actually is. The example given here is that of persons unaware of the faults of Svargaloka, heaven, and therefore eager to achieve it, they praise heaven profusely, citing such words as these. The happiness of the residents of heaven comes just as desired, stays untainted by misery, and is not overtaken by misery at the end. Vedarta of Gadadhar Bhatt. Sense enjoyers are unmindful that the residents of Swargaloka quarrel, and they fear losing their positions, and that their enjoyment of heaven is temporary and tarnished by various kinds of discomfort.
Yeah, that's any questions or comments here?
Yeah, I'd like to know what kind of discomforts. I thought everything is. I know they argue, and they're scared of their losing their positions.
Yeah, that's why it's interesting. It's brought up here because actually, the what they call it, the flowery words of the Vedas often speak in a very positive way to those who follow karma kanda about the attainment of the heavenly realms. So, in order to attract them to lead some type of regulated Vedic lifestyle, but actually, it's not all it's made out to be, and that's what's being pointed out here, described here. There is quarrel because they are mixed devotees. They're not pure devotees. They are mixed devotees. So they're not at the stage of perfection. So there is envy in the heavenly planets. It is not the spiritual world. Yeah, it's the spiritual world. Krishna's abode is a place where there is no envy. So also we read in Srimad Bhagavatam of plenty of persons in heaven being cursed and falling from heaven. And also we hear of sometimes the heavenly planets gets ransacked. Who is it? Bali Maharaj. It gets completely ransacked by the daityas, and they have to run into hiding. So it's part of the material world. Yeah, which means it comes with anxiety. Yeah, as Bhagavad Gita says also, isn't it? From the highest planet down to the lowest, all the places of repeated birth and death. Yeah, so just like here in New York, it's a massive city, and we're in Brooklyn, and it's not like it was 20, 30 years ago. It's a very up class place to actually live. You know, there's flats here cost £5 million for a studio flat, things like that. You know, so even within a city, you're going to get your high end living, but it doesn't mean the persons living in these places are free of stress and anxiety. Probably it might even be more in some ways than a person living on Skid Row. Anyway, so the summary is part of the material world. So there is envy, and they get cursed. There's cursing goes on there. Yeah, and they lose their position. But it's often put forward. It's often the heavenly realms are put forward in order to attract one from the earthly realms. But on the small writing, on the ingredients at the back, there's a lot to be concerned about. You know, it's not the place to aim for. And even if you go there, you're going to have to come back. So what's the point? Anybody else on that? Did that help? Yeah.
Didn't we read that Gopkumar went to heavenly planets and Indra ran away and he ended up becoming Indra?
Yeah, there we go. That's one example. Indra had to go into hiding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the material world. Yeah. Then there's another verse in Bhagavatam that says that intelligent person should endeavor only for that purposeful end, which is not achieved by wandering from the topmost planet down to, or from the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, down to the Kovada. Someone who's actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor for that purposeful end, which is not obtained from going to heaven. So someone who's actually wise, they going to go for the spiritual world, Krishna's abode. Hare Krishna. Any other comments on that? Otherwise, you can read on.
Yeah. Sorry, what text am I starting on?
191.
191, yeah. But only in devotional service does the highest degree of happiness naturally arise. That happiness is the right reward for those who practice serving the Supreme Lord's all-blissful lotus feet. Text 192. The highest degree indicates greatness that has reached its ultimate peak, but in fact that endless happiness has no limit. Commentary. The glories of devotional service are difficult to describe without straining the capacity of words. The phrase parakashta, highest degree, implies that no higher degree exists, but the happiness of pure devotional service never reaches a final peak. It keeps on increasing forever. Calling it the parakashta of happiness is only a poetic attempt to do it justice with words available in human language.
Yes, this is a nice point. So I was mentioning this the other day that, was it here? I was mentioning that the ocean has a certain depth. You're going to get to the bottom of it at some point. But spiritual, or the experience of bliss and happiness that's experienced in devotion to Krishna, there is no depth for it. There is no depth to it. It's described here. It just keeps on finding. Yeah, it's like an ocean. It's like, well, it's not. It's like a spiritual ocean. Hare Krishna. But that's not our goal, because we're hearing about happiness in Goloka. But actually, it's not that we actually focus on that as, oh, that's a really good place. Actually, we just focus on serving Krishna. And that comes as a byproduct. Yeah, because it's so intimately connected with Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Okay, text 193. That happiness increases endlessly. It is limitless and supremely great. In contrast, the happiness of Brahman found in liberation never increases because it is limited. Commentary. The Bhakti Shastras here explicitly confirm that the happiness of bhakti increases constantly, and to dispel any misconception that this increase may eventually come to an end, they further qualify it as ananta, endless. At every moment, pure devotees experience bhakti ras as newer and newer, sweeter and sweeter, and more intense. Because Brahman cannot develop or transform in any way, the happiness of realizing Brahman is static. When impersonalists call their Brahma Sukha the parakasta of happiness, they mean that it has virtually reached a peak, beyond which it can progress no further. Text 194. The Supreme Lord is also the Supreme Soul and the Supreme Brahman. Since they are all the same one being, they cannot be considered different members of the same category. Commentary. The Vedas are accepted as perfect authority both by impersonalists and by devotees of the Supreme Lord. But when the Vedic Upanishads declare that there is no duality in the Supreme, the personalists and the impersonalists understand this in opposite ways. For the Advaitavadi impersonalists, the oneness of Brahman means that all form and variety are illusion. For the Vaishnavas, however, the Supreme, although one, is full of variety. How can this be so? The Vedas now begin to explain to Gopakumar, starting with 2 verses discussing the absence of difference in the Supreme. Differences can be analyzed as being of 2 kinds, Sajatiya and Vijatiya. Similar things, like two men, will differ as individuals. This is called Sajatiya Beda, the difference between members of the same category. Dissimilar things, like a man and a cow, differ by Vijatiya Beda, the difference between members of separate categories. Now, because the jivas are manifestations of Brahman, and because in earlier verses we heard that the jivas are always distinct as individuals, someone may object that we here find ourselves facing a Brahman in which there are Sajatiya differences. That is, Brahman now seems to consist of members of one category who differ from one another. But this makes no sense, because it would contradict the very nature of Brahman, which by the definition of the authoritative Upanishads is ekam, absolutely one, and advayam, allowing of no differences whatsoever. Point taken, but how, as expressed by the formula ekam advayam, the Supreme is free of all dualities? Sajatiya and Vijatiya is shown in a different way in this verse and the next. Despite our being surrounded by a world full of apparent variety, the impersonalists construe ekam advayam in its most strictly literal sense, saying that there are absolutely no dualities at all. But what the Vedas actually mean by these words is much more sensibly with our common experience. Here, how Brahman is ekam, that is free from Sajatiya differences, is best understood in the following way. The impersonal absolute Parabrahma, the indwelling controller of the jivas, Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Parameshvara, are one absolute truth. There is no difference between the three. When the Supreme Absolute, as the Personality of Godhead, further expands into countless forms, guna avatars, lila avatars, and so on, these avatars may seem different from one another, but in reality they are one and the same person. In all his plenary manifestations, he never becomes any less than his full self, in spite of external appearances. Thus, any attempt to analyze the plenary expansions of Godhead as different members of one category is doomed to fail. Brahman does, however, have expansions of his energy in the form of the finite living beings, as discussed in the next verse.
Okay, did anyone understand anything from this? Because I hope you did, because I didn't. I'm going to help explain.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, I must admit, I was a bit distracted. I had a meeting just before this, and my mind was a bit, but well, let's try and understand a little bit without taking the whole session.
Is he saying that
jivas,
when jivas enter Brahman, I thought jivas cannot lose their individual identity. I'm confused already.
Well, that's what we understand from the Bhagavad Gita. Mayam savo jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. So, although one may enter into what's called a vimukta mananas, an imagined place of non-duality or non-form, but actually the jiva is always the jiva, so he cannot be extinguished or cannot merge. As far as I'm just reading through a few sentences here. If there's no duality in the Supreme. For the authoritative, the impersonalist, the oneness of Brahma means that an atom just lost me. The oneness of Brahma means that all form and variety are illusion. Now that we're all clear with, isn't it? That's quite straightforward. That's what the Mayavadis say. They say this Advaitavadi, so Advaita means one. So Vadi, those who follow the philosophy of oneness. So that means there's no variety. Any variety is part of Maya. Yeah. But the Vaishnava, okay, so the Vaishnavas also say everything's one, but that oneness is full of variety. Like the spiritual world is made of the same internal energy. So in that sense, it's one. But within the oneness, there is a variety, as we know. And that's what makes up the wonder and beauty of loving exchanges with Krishna. There's Krishna. He has his supreme mood. Radharani has her mood. Jatila has her mood. Vishaka has her mood. Lalita has her mood. The cowherd boys, so there's plenty of variety, but it's all within the spiritual the one spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
So
the jivas actually the jivas, when they say they're aspiring to enter Brahman, become one with Brahman, actually they never achieve that because they will always be individual. It's just an imagination that they've become one with Brahman, because Brahman is a separate energy of the Supreme Lord. I mean, they join with it, but they cannot become one with it.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's why there's that verse as well. Yenai vivaksha vimukshamanina asta avashut abodhayaho. That describes that for those that don't take shelter of Krishna, they actually fall down from their platform of imagined liberation because they're not attached to Krishna. I think we're probably familiar with that before, that they cannot stay in that place of so-called oneness, where I think we mentioned before, I think Mother Wangshi mentioned that it becomes suspended in suspended emanation, and it becomes, so that's correct. I'm just looking at these two differences can be analyzed as being two different kinds. So then sajatiya and vijatiya. Okay, let's just have a quick look at this. Similar things, like two men will differ as individuals. Okay, that's clear. And then this is called Satyatiya Beda. So that's quite obvious. The two men, both of the same sex, they're both human beings, but they're going to be individuals. So individuals in the same category. But then there's another type of difference. That's difference in species. Yeah. That's like Darwin's theories that species can transform into another species over the course of millions of lives. That's what Darwin says. But actually, it doesn't happen. They may have some differences, like going off the track here. Darwin used his theory of evolution based on the finches that he studied in the Galapagos Islands. And he found that the features from different clusters of islands differed. And he said that's according to the evolutionary need. So some survive better than others. But they still remain finches. Finches don't become lions. They still, so so within species, there is difference. But species still remain species. Like, for example, some persons, they manipulate flowers and vegetables, and they may get different shaped vegetables. They get different sized tomatoes, or different shaped pears by their chemical manipulation. But pear will always be a pear. They can never make it that a pear becomes a pineapple. It just doesn't happen. Or they can't make it like chickens give birth to square eggs. They can't. So anyway, perhaps that's enough for us to understand in this purport here. This is the point that's being made. Unless there's any other questions, where kind of that there can be difference. Let's just take it like that. The so-called ekam advayam. There is oneness in the spiritual world, but within it there is distinction. Yeah, then it mentions here, when the Supreme Absolute as the personality of God that further expands into form. So he expands into Guna avatars, Leela avatars, but they are but they're different from one another, but in reality they are one and the same. So what's the name for that?
Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva.
Yeah, Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva. I'm surprised that Gopi Pranadhana hasn't mentioned that. Perhaps he will.
No, he has he not? Or is
But
it
that, yeah, but those actual words, the words, I mean, Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva.
Veda. So he's only used one word. He's used one word.
All right, perhaps that's as far as we're going to probably, yeah. Sorry?
We can understand that bit, that everything coming from Krishna. So it's all like, his expansions or different. But But when Krishna comes, everything is in him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's in that sense it's all one.
Yeah.
But so that's the Mayavada. They say it's all one without any distinction.
Yes, because
so there's a difference. Go on.
They don't realize to the point that he's one, but they don't understand that everything in that one can expand to everything else.
And the point's being kind of highlighted here is the ecstasy that is experienced in that oneness with variety, which is the spiritual world and all of the pastimes that go on. The bliss and the ecstasy, there is no limit to it. It is unlimited, but the so-called ecstasy of this oneness, it's limited. It's got a cap upon it. It's not like it has its limits. So that's what's been brought out here. But the bliss that's in the, what is it? In the Vijayatirtha Bheda is much more. It is unlimited. Okay, quite technical. All right, let's read another verse, shall we? If someone else would like to read.
Yeah, I can read.
Go ahead. 195.
Text 195. The jivas always have their own identities. Different.
There you go. The jivas always have their own identities. Here it is.
Different from that of the Supreme, but they are parts of the Supreme and cannot exist separate from him. And this rules out the difference called Vijatiya. Commentary. This verse establishes the actual way that Brahman is Advayam, free from all dualities. The Jiva, it is true, belong to the categories other than Brahma, such as category Brahman, yeah. Such as the category of things that have finite size. In that sense, they are different from Brahman. But in other respects, they are non-different from him. They are expansions of the same creative living force of which Brahman's own supreme personality consists. And they are his integral parts, naturally sharing many of his qualities. Thus, although they are the individuals and eternally remain so, they are not entirely separate from the absolute Brahman, the supreme person.
Yeah, what's an example to explain this that Prabhupada would sometimes give?
Was it like, a mountain? Looking at a mountain from distance and closer, and then.
That's a distinction between Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. But just the fact here that we are, in one sense, coming from Krishna. We are of the same spiritual substance. So that's the oneness. But we are parts and parcels of him. We are like sparks of the flame. So we have the same qualities as Krishna, but not in quantity. The very fact that we do have an equality means it's in the Supreme. So there's a nice example that Prabhupada gives to illustrate this, that we are like Krishna in quality, but not in quantity, just like a
drop of ocean water.
Yes, you got it. Yeah. Just like the drop of the ocean has all the qualities of the whole expansive ocean, but in a very small, minute degree. Yeah. So same with us. We are just like a little drop. We have the same qualities as Krishna, but in a very small, minute degree. And practically it's completely covered in the conditioned state. I think Nectar Devotion describes the percentage. I forget what that is, if someone knows. The percentage that one can exhibit the qualities of Krishna. There's a certain percentage that Rupa Goswami gives. Yeah. Yes, Hare Krishna. You can carry on, Mama, unless there's any questions or comments on this. Again, so the jivas always have their own identities. Here it is. Okay.
Text 196. We fully approve of this philosophical doctrine.
Oh, here it is. Beta.
Yeah. Indeed, when it is presented with logical argument, everything about it is certain and irrefutable. Commentary. The scriptures dedicated solely to the propounding pure devotional service agree with the concept of Veda Bhed and with its logical supporting arguments. With the help of this philosophical framework for understanding the identities, relationships, and purposes of all things that exist, the Bhakti Shastras faultlessly explain the path of devotional service and reconcile all possible doubts and contradictions, both spoken and unspoken. Thus, the presentation of the Bhakti Shastras is definitely
definitive. Is definitive.
Definitive, dhruvam. The impersonalists say that since the jiva come into being from Brahman and are again absorbed back into Brahman, they are altogether non-different from Brahman. But even according to this theory, the happiness of impersonal liberation is meager, because that liberation rules out perception of the totality of Brahman. Waves do arise in one part of an ocean and dissolve in another on the ocean shore. And since the waves and the ocean consist of the same water, they are non-different. Yet, even though the waves, when they dissolve again, become one with the ocean in the sense that their separate existence is no longer visible, the waves don't have the same depth as the ocean, nor can they generate precious jewels. So the waves and the ocean are also different. Applying the metaphor of ocean and the waves, one formulation of the impersonalist theory would have it that when jivas attain liberation by merging back into the individual portions of Brahman from which they originated, they again become one with Brahman. But the Bhakti Shastras respond that because the jivas are by their very nature separate and finite, they cannot become the undivided supreme and enjoy all of his unlimited bliss. On the contrary, even according to the theory, they continue to exist separately in liberation, retaining their individuality even in union with the Supreme. This implies that although they are non-different from Brahman, they are also in some ways different from him. The scriptures accordingly describe that sometimes by the Supreme Lord's special mercy, a liberated soul merged into oneness with Brahman becomes eager for the joys of bhakti and once again assumes his distinct identity so that he can have a spiritual body with which to serve the Lord. On this point, Sri Shankaracharya Pad has said, my Lord, even when all differences is gone, I am still yours, though you are not mine. A wave belongs to the ocean, but surely the ocean does not belong to the wave. Prarthana Saptapadi 3. This statement by Acharya Shankar expressing the basic idea of the Bheda-Bhed philosophy, is very much to the point. Even after the jiva's illusory difference from the Lord is destroyed, his real difference of belonging to the Lord remains. If this were not so, there would be no meaning to the words Nath Tavaham, Lord, I am yours. The separate river waters cannot literally become the ocean, which has qualities of rivers, which has qualities the rivers do not possess, like the ability to produce gems. The rivers are only said to be one with the ocean because after they flow into the ocean, their separate existence is no longer visible. But in fact, that oneness is unreal. In the same way, liberation as impersonally conceived is unreal, for it implies that liberation equals non-existence, just like that of an extinguished flame. Again, if the liberated soul has become completely one with Brahman, he has no scope for happiness, since the liberated self is not supposed to keep the mind and other faculties of the individual consciousness with which happiness could be tasted. Even when liberated, the soul remains individual. Thus, when the standard scriptures consider the 4 kinds of annihilation, the constant degradation of matter, the partial destruction of the universe at the end of Brahma's day, the total destruction of the universe at the end of Brahma's life, and the liberation of individual souls, the scriptures distinguish between the liberation and the total annihilation.
Okay, quite a lengthy purport. Any questions here? I guess this is so far the most philosophical part of the Brhat Bhagavatamrta, I think. Yes, again, discussion is here. But you've heard this example that the impersonalists give, or you might have heard, for instance, when the pot, sometimes you give the example of a pot. When you break the pot, the outside of the pot becomes one with the inside. So they say that. So we are like the pot. So through the process of sadhana and austerity, we can break the pot. Then we realize there's no difference between the outside and the inside. And there's another one given here, just like the streams flow into the ocean and become one with the ocean. So they use that as an example. And also when the green parrot flies into the green tree, it seems to become one. Yeah. But these examples cannot really express the true or this true dynamic of the eternal individuality of the jiva. The jiva is always individual, always has his own individuality. So I was thinking that most likely it's very rare you're going to meet, you don't meet them unless you go searching for them in particular places. You're not going to meet Mayavadis generally on the street or shopping in Sainsbury's and have a conversation with them. Not Mayavad scholars, but you're going to, most people, I think I've said this before, most people who come to the temple coming from a Hindu perspective, if they're not if they don't have a B-bag, generally they're going to have some type of impersonalist understanding. Yeah, it's going to be there to like one degree or another. So, but they may not be die-hard Mayavadis where they haven't accepted it. They've just innocently been told that by their village guru, by their father, or whatever it may be, by their whatever. They may have studied under a particular guru. So it's good to be somewhat accustomed, know somewhat the arguments in order to help people to step over into the world of bhakti. So here's some direction being given. So we might not remember all the details here, but some basic outline what's been described. Yeah, fortunately, I never read about this philosophy before I joined. At least I can't remember reading it. I can't recall. So I didn't really. It was only when I started reading Prabhupada's books and coming to the temple that I started to read about so-called Brahman, and everything is one. Yeah, it's only so probably just as well. I heard about Brahman coming from Prabhupada, coming from the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta, because it's all pervading over India. I would say, although ISKCON's making massive inroads now in India, I would still say that the impersonalist philosophy has a very strong hold in India. Would you say that, Mother Rajkishore?
Yeah.
Yeah. All the villages, they all, oneness. Unless you go down to South India, I think it's a bit different there. The followers of Ramanujacharya, also the
Madhavacharya.
Yeah, Madhavacharya, they're all Vaishnavas. So many in South India. But other than that, it's quite widely accepted oneness. So that's why Prabhupada was on a mission. Paschatchada Shatarini, Sunyavadi, Paschatchada Shatarini. It's in Prabhupada's Pranam mantra. Yeah. Any comments or questions? Otherwise, we can continue reading. We can. Yeah.
Okay, text 197.
Let's just check the length of the what? Oh, another lengthy purple pages. Okay. Let's get ready for this. We might stop. Let's perhaps stop as we go along in this purple so we don't lose track.
That because then we can
have some hope of following its logic. Okay, go on.
Okay. Text 197. We scriptures are always accepted. Does it sound right? We scriptures are always accepted.
Because this is reminding us that this is the discussion of the scriptures are speaking with each other.
Oh, yeah.
You remember? The Upanishads are speaking with the Itihasas, and the Itihasas are speaking. Then the Bhagavatam, they walked out, and then they came back into the discussion. And like that.
Okay. We scriptures are always accepted as authoritative. Our words and the words and behavior of great souls are standard evidence in all circumstances. Commentary. In the opinion of some transcendentalists, the absolute truth, eternally one without a second, becomes differentiated only by the superficial covering of illusion, which makes the one absolute falsely appear in many jivas. And when
to falsely appear as many jivas. So what's been said here, just the concept that there are different jivas is false. That's part of illusion. This is what they say. To consider me to be different from you is illusion. So here they're saying, which makes the one absolute falsely appear as many jivas. So it's false. It's false. Well, that's what they're saying, okay? So that's the argument in favor of Mayavad.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's a big purport. I don't know. It's not. I was thinking, why don't you read and stop where you want to explain?
Okay. Let's do that.
Instead of breaking.
Yeah, or you can stop me as well if something stops. So those first three lines, this is the Mayavad philosophy. Okay, this is not our philosophy. Okay.
Read from the beginning, please. Sorry.
And when by knowledge of reality that false appearance is stripped away, only the absolute truth remains manifest alone. Thus, when illusion is dispelled, the illusion that arises when circumstantial designations makes the jivas seem to separately exist, one attains mukti, in which one perceives as before the intense bliss of one's true identity as Brahman. And so, by this reasoning, Brahman realization does constitute substantial happiness. So this is the Mayavad's theory, okay? This is what's often done in, I forget the words for it, but in the Brahma Sutras, the argument's put forward first. Is the Sanskrit word for it. The argument is put forward first. And then next there will become arguments against it. Then next there will be examples given. So this is arguments for Mayavad philosophy.
Vitanda.
Yeah, you got it. Vitanda, what's it? Yeah. And so by this reasoning, Brahman realization does constitute substantial happiness. In mukti, furthermore, according to this view, there is no longer attraction to the false ego, even in the most subtle forms. So this means illusion, even the identity of the self is actually false. It's kind of mind-boggling. The identify yourself is false ego.
Why
No,
is
but
scriptures putting Mayavadi, explaining Mayavadi?
it's not. This is, as far as I can understand, this is Gopi Puranadana in the commentary. Let's just get through it. Yeah, you're probably going to find. Yeah.
Okay.
Brahman. Thus, in mukti, real happiness is known. The happiness that comes from realizing the true identity of the self. The proponents of. So now this is in our camp now, okay? The proponents of devotion to the personality of Godhead. Oh, right, no, it's not. This is arguments. They're arguing against us. The proponents of devotion to the personality of Godhead may believe that when the personal identity of Sri Bhagavan, the embodiment of Satchit Ananda, is constantly revealed, they can enjoy the most sublime and concentrated bliss, greater than that of liberation. And so they may claim that bhakti is greater than mukti. All right, so, but these beliefs are incorrect. That's Mayavadi saying that.
Yes.
The bliss of Brahman is perfect and complete. Such are the views. So such are the views of the impersonalists. All right. So Gopi Pranadhan has given us a nice, good kind of glimpse at Mayavad philosophy. Such are the views of impersonalists. And in text 197 through 204, the Bhakti sastras refute. What verse is this? This is 19. Okay. Oh no. Yeah, and in text 197, that's this one, through 204, the Bhakti sastras refute such ideas. So these next three verses are going to refute all of that. Srimad Bhagavatam and other Bhakti sastras offer many statements in refutation of the impersonalist outlook. Here are but a few examples. And this is a famous verse mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Lord Chaitanya spoke on this verse to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and he gave like 64 different meanings of this. This is the Atmarama verse. Even those who are so satisfied and unattracted by external material desires are attracted to the loving service of Krishna, whose qualities are transcendental and whose activities are wonderful. Hari, the personality of Godhead, is called Krishna because he has such transcendently attractive features. So we mentioned this many times, two examples of devotees who were self-satisfied, unattracted, and absorbed in Brahman. Then they became attracted to Krishna. Who is that?
Narada Muni?
Narada Muni, no. The four Kauravas, correct. And
Sutta Goswami or
Sukadev Goswami. Yeah. So there's two examples. The senses, being symbolic representations of the demigods, are naturally inclined to work as directed by the Vedic injunctions. And as the senses represent the demigods, so the mind represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in service to the Personality of Godhead, or hitagi, which means without any motive, that devotional service is far better than even salvation or mukti, siddhi.
So this
and
is
then,
changed, isn't it, now? Before it was kind of Mayavadi, but now...
Yeah, now it's the Vaishnava philosophy.
Yes.
Yeah. So the natural natural tendency of the mind and the senses, because they're manifestations, the senses themselves, of the adibotic principle, is to be engaged in the service of the Lord. And then he quotes this verse here. And someone can tell what's the context of this verse. This is a well-known verse as well. Devotees solely engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, never fear any condition of life. For them, the heavenly planets, liberation, and the hellish planets are all the same. For such devotees are interested only in the service of the Lord. So no dualities in this world. For a devotee is so absorbed in the service of the Lord. So anyone could tell us what context this verse is spoken of in the Srimad Bhagavatam? Sixth canto. I can give you a clue. It's there's one devotee was cursed.
Chitraketu.
Yep, you got it. Yeah, he was cursed by who?
Parvati.
Parvati, and we know why she cursed him, isn't it? He was laughing at his hair, and she cursed him to take birth as a demon, and he folded his hands and said, "Thank you, mother." Completely, he was, and then Lord Shiva was just saying, "Just see how superior he is to you. He doesn't care where he goes. You've cursed him to take birth as a demon, but devotees are only if they're only fixed on Krishna's lotus feet, so you can put them anywhere, and they're going to be completely happy in serving the Lord." So that's why Lord Shiva said this verse: devotees solely engaged in devotional service never fear any condition. All right, you've cursed him to take birth as a demon, but he's, did you see his reaction? He wasn't bothered. Okay, continuing.
Yeah,
My lords, yeah?
That's a good stage to get to. Then doesn't matter where you are, you're so focused that it doesn't
matter. It's not always so easy, but these stories are there to inspire us,
Yes.
We're going to have to face the diabolical dualities of this world. Unfair, unjust. Often we might have, we're going to have to face it. It's part of being in a material world. But we continue serving the Lord. We continue having faith in the Lord. And we may not understand. We may not understand exactly what is happening, why it's happening. But we continue.
But later on, when you're going through something, I think it does come to your thoughts, ideas, why Krishna does this, that, whatever. You do understand it. And that it's for your best.
Yeah. But often it may be in retrospect. Often. Sometimes it's good to immediately come to that conclusion. Then we can deal with the situation in a much more sober way, Much more sober way. But yeah, as devotees of the Lord, our life is arranged by Krishna.
Yeah.
So Maharaj Chitraketu, he was in that consciousness, So he was prepared to go to, take birth as a demon. That means he's got fangs. That means he has a taste for meat. He's got coppery eyes,
But he was conscious of his...
Yeah, as we know. Then then he took birth as Vritrashura, isn't it? Vritrashura. Yeah. And there's wonderful prayers that Vaishnavas really like the prayers of Vritrashura. He's telling Indra, please kill me, come on.
Yeah.
I'm going back to Godhead after this. Yeah. So, my Lord, looked at the time, 3 minutes. My Lord, some fortunate souls have gotten relief from the fatigue of material life by diving into the vast nectar ocean of your pastimes, which you enact when you manifest your personal forms to make known the unfathomable science of the self. These rare souls indifferent even to liberation, renounce the happiness of home and family because of association with devotees who are like flocks of swans enjoying at your lotus feet. 1087:21. Now, without looking, I cannot remember the context who's speaking this, the 10th canto. Indeed, even liberation is insignificant for those whose minds are attracted to the loving service of Madhavit. Yeah. These authoritative statements of the Bhagavatam and other Bhakti sastras are supported by thousands and thousands of recorded statements by great saintly persons. Vaishnavas like Narada, Prahlad, and Hanuman have expressed themselves unequivocally on this topic. For example, in the Bhakti Rasmrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami refers to this well-known statement by Hanuman. Even though liberation destroys the bondage of material existence, I have no desire for liberation, in which I would forget that you are the master and I am your servant. Yeah, there's many, many verses in this part of Nectar of Devotion, glorifying the happiness of bhakti compared to that of liberation. Yeah. Recent authorities have spoken the same way. For example, Paramahamsa Sri Shankaracharya Bhagavad-pada, the all-knowing commentator on the important Shrutis, has said in his commentary on the Nrsimha Tapani Upanishad, Mukta api leelaya vikraham kritva bhagavatam bhajanti. For pastimes, even those who are liberated accept new bodies to worship the Supreme Lord. This accords with the Vedanta Sutra 132, which says that Brahman is approached for shelter by persons who are liberated. Mukto paspritya vyapadeshat. Sri Sukadev, the 4 Kamaras, we mentioned those, well done, we came up, and others like them were attracted to narrations of the pastimes of the personality of Godhead. And Prahlad, Hanuman, and others refused to accept moksha. All right, that's interesting. They refused to accept it. They was offered it, even by the Lord himself. This evidence from scripture and the words and behavior of saintly persons is authoritative in all circumstances. Sarvata, that means complete, sarvata at the end, and at all times. It should never be dismissed as what in Vedic terms is called artha-vada, or mere sectarian view. It's not just what we think, it's what the Vedas say. The statements of the Bhakti sastras like Srimad Bhagavatam and of great devotees like Narada, Hanuman, and Sukadev need no authentication from other evidence. They're always perfect. Okay, Hari Om Tat Sat, Hare Krishna. Okay, let's stop there for today. Yeah, next week you can be
Monday.
Yeah, I'll confirm with what day next week, so you can get into Lila and Rita next week. I'm sure you'll be happy about that. You can have a rest. You can have a rest from me, Hare Krishna, and get into Lila and Rita. Okay, thank you, everyone. I wish you all the best. Hari Bol, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna.
Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Hare.